Hey, this is my tutorial on Claude Code, and I'm actually not going to give a from zero type of tutorial. I'm going to assume you kind of are already using Claude Code or interested in using it, but basically to compare to some of the other tooling out there for AI assisted coding, obviously we have Cursor, which is probably the industry standard right now for vibe coding or just using AI to help you write your code. I personally use it. It's really cool. You probably are going to end up paying $20 a month for a subscription if you're using it heavily. And then you have things like Claude, which live in your terminal. Um, and yeah, they're almost like operating systems, so you can like extend them and customize them and make AIs that fire off other AIs and create botnets or whatever you want to do. And I should say there's a lot of different frameworks out there for doing this. Um, OpenAI just released Codex, which I believe is free if you have a ChatGPT Pro subscription, but it's not as sophisticated as Claude. So I would recommend sticking with Claude if you want sort of a terminal-based chatbot and automation engine. Now, Claude and Cursor are owned by the same company, Anthropic. However, you are going to need a different subscription for each. Um, Claude is probably also going to cost $20 a month. So you can use Claude Code inside of Cursor, but it's just not quite as smooth as Cursor's native agents. So I think if you're a professional software engineer, you probably will end up wanting to subscribe to both. I mean, $40 a month is not crazy for the amount of utility these things are giving you. Um, so in this tutorial, I'm not really going to be giving a from scratch surface level introduction to Claude. I'm going to be um, basically giving some tips for understanding how to more deeply customize it and some optimization. So it's not really like a from zero type tutorial. I'm going to kind of assume you maybe have already played around with it and are trying to understand or figure out your workflow. So yeah, I'm not really going to cover installation. Obviously, you have this YOLO mode you can enable. And I just want to mention, yeah, Claude is self-extensible. So if you want to just say like, hey, Claude, how does your internals work? How do I customize you? What does this do? What does that do? You can just do it. Like I don't usually edit my Claude config myself. I usually ask Claude to do it for me, and then I just restart Claude. Um, yeah, so I've already talked about Claude or Cursor. Yeah, meta command. So one important concept is you want to keep your context low in AI engineering. Context is sort of like the agent's RAM, um, and you have a maximum, so like 200K tokens. And once, as you send more messages, it'll continue to fill up this context because it basically remembers the whole message chain. And once it hits the peak, it will have to like summarize the whole context and then restart. So if you want to keep the AI sort of working smoothly and following your instructions closely, you want to keep the context low. And I'll be talking more about ways to do that, but slash context is the command to check that out. And then obviously slash usage will just show you your quota according to your subscription. Slash resume, if you're just restarting a cloud session, you can go back to an old one. Slash memory can update Claude's global instructions. Slash MCP, I'll talk more about MCP servers later, but this is a way to talk to third-party services and automate various things. Um, so, and then slash agents, obviously, and then let's see what else. Exclamation mark will enter bash mode, so I can just send bash commands. Um, and then outside of Claude, you can do Claude dash P, and then like it'll just give you your response and exit, so it doesn't enter that like interactive loop. And then you can also pipe commands um, into Claude dash P, and then say like what kind of content is in this document. Oh, oh, sorry, I spelled Claude wrong. Oopsies. Um, oh, well, whatever. So that works. So you can pipe stuff in. Um, Anyway, so so here's kind of some stuff I'm going to be talking about, like all these different ways to configure Claude. You have user level versus project level config, memory, subagent, slash command, skills, MCP, and plugins. The one thing I'll talk about right now is just user level versus project level. So um, if you look in your home directory in the hidden folder called Claude, this is what's called user level configuration. But since you only really use one user on your computer, it can be considered global configuration. But then if you're working on some specific coding project, you can have your own configuration in there, which is what's called project level configuration, and you'll have another Claude folder in there. Um, so let's just start out with talking about memories. So memories is the entry point's Claude.md. And if you have a user level Claude.md, but you can also have one in the specific project you're working on, and they'll kind of be combined. And this just is a markdown file, and it contains instructions for Claude. You don't have to put everything in this one file. You can actually reference other files, but you need to use a specific syntax like at, and then you give it a path to other file, and that'll kind of just include it in here. I found it probably, I think it's most dependable just to use absolute paths, and you can't give it like directories, so it won't work. So Um, yeah, that's pretty much it. And this is just always loaded into context every time you open a Claude session. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it on that. And then agents, um, yeah, so in the agents folder here, you have a bunch of different markdown files, and they have this sort of front matter up here, which has a name, description, a model, and then MCP servers they have access to. And then with Claude.md, you can kind of tell Claude when it should delegate tasks to these subagents. And I'll talk a little bit more about how I'm using them with regards to MCP. Um, but yeah, that's pretty much the concept. And like the idea with an agent is um, you tell it to do it has like a more specific set of skills. So like you are an expert in using Spotify MCP servers. So every time I tell Claude to do something with Spotify, send it to the sub agent, and the sub agent will maybe do a better job with it because its focus is more narrow. That's kind of the theory. Um, yeah, and there is some stuff here regarding MCPs, which I'll talk about a little later, some more nuanced details. But next is slash command. So basically, if I'm in Claude um, and you just do slash, you'll see all these built-in commands, obviously, and you can add your own here. And they do have support for like arguments. They live in this commands directory, so you can reference arguments in here. You can find the docs for that online, but you don't actually need to give them like formal arguments. You can also just say like slash KB search. What is the, I don't know, history of something, and it'll search your knowledge base for that. So you don't really have to explicitly give it as an argument. This should work. Um, yeah. Um, and one other thing I want to mention is you can like tell Claude like when X happens, invoke the slash whatever command. So you can make Claude do it automatically, but these commands are intended sort of for you to call manually. But you can instruct Claude to call them itself. And then what is skills? The idea of a skill is it's very similar to a slash command, but rather than you calling it yourself, like sort of by name, Claude is supposed to kind of figure out when it needs to run this skill and then do it. But sort of in practice, they're really not that different. You actually can call these skills explicitly. Like if I do slash what's the one? I don't know. Download Spotify album. It doesn't show up here as a slash command, but it'll literally just run the skill. So um So they're not actually that different. Now, skills have a sort of folder structure where you have to give it skill.md, and it has also this front matter here. And you can also put in like scripts in here. So I have a skill for downloading an album from Spotify. And this integration is super cool. Like, for example, if I just say, if I'm playing this right here, and I just go here and I say, like, download the currently playing Spotify album, it'll basically fire off this subagent that's going to query Spotify. It's going to figure out what it is, and then it's going to call this skill here. Um, I'm actually not going to do it right now, but yeah, it'll do all that automatically for me. Um, what else about um, skills? Oh yeah, they're not really like loaded into memory as needed. So when Claude boots up, it doesn't really know what exactly this skill is, except for the description and the name. It just knows that when the user wants to do something that might use this skill, I'm going to basically load the full instructions. So it can be thought of as lazy loading context, which is helpful for context management. And I've actually added a custom slash command, which is called skills. And so if I type in slash skills, it'll just show me all the skills that it has. And you can straight up just ask Claude, like, from a subagent definition or Claude MD, just say like, call this skill when this happens. So yeah, they're not really that different from slash commands, to be honest. Um, okay, so what is MCP? So I think, yeah, I've been configuring these using the terminal. So MCP, like Claude, MCP add, and then you do transport. So it's better to do Claude MCP help, and then it'll give you some examples of how to add or remove one. You can remove it as well. Um, And you can do Claude MCP list, and this will show you. I actually currently have only one MCP connected, which is a gateway to multiple MCPs, which I'll talk more about why that's very helpful to do and not that difficult. Um, but anyway, so yeah, they interact with third-party services like Gmail, Notion, Spotify, and like a billion other things. Like most APIs these days are like most people are trying to use them with or a lot of them. The people are trying to use them with MCPs. It just really helps to automate things. They're not that hard to make. There are two kinds: standard STIO and HTTP. Generally, STIO ones you're going to have to run them on your own computer, but you don't really have to do that yourself because when you open Claude, it'll automatically kind of start them for you behind the scenes. And then HTTP is like ones that you're just hitting some URL for it. Um, Regarding environment variables in Bash profile, so when you set it up, you can kind of give it environment variables. Now, I haven't really totally played around with this, but there might be a way to configure Claude to use certain environment variables when it opens, rather than providing them explicitly in the commands for the MCP. But I haven't really played with that yet, so I'm not sure. But that might be a little more secure because maybe you have all your environment variables in one less place. Um, yeah, and in theory, you can implement subagents using MCPs or like self-replicating system. But you don't need to do that because in Claude, because Claude can already fire off subagents. But in theory, you could like make an MCP which fires off more Claudes. And actually, in Codex, which doesn't have subagents, that's the only way to fire off a subagent is using an MCP. And now the one major flaw with MCPs is they fill up your context very rapidly, even when you aren't using them. So when I first started with Claude, I downloaded like 8 MCPs, and I opened up slash context, and the MCP thing here was taking up about 50% of my total tokens, about 100K tokens, and that's literally on boot. And that's because it's loading like all of these tool definitions and all the guidelines for using the tools. And yeah, that's a bit of a problem, especially because you're likely going to want to use a bunch of different MCPs because they're pretty awesome. So I'll show a solution to that next. And that is basically the MCP gateway. And yeah, I've already mentioned the problem. And then, you might think the solution, okay, maybe this is a solution. What if we made a sub-agent for each MCP and only made um, the MCP available to that sub-agent? So we remove it from the global context, right? So whenever I say do something with Spotify, it'll call the sub-agent, and then the sub-agent has access to the MCP, but the global kind of agent doesn't know anything about the MCP, right? The problem is that's not actually possible. In order to give a sub-agent access to an MCP, it needs to also be accessible to the global agent. And so the actual solution is to use an agent MCP gateway. Now, there are a number of these out there. I've just kind of found this one and have been using this. Um, and yeah, so how does this actually work? So Claude has only one MCP connected directly, which as you see here, I do. And you make a sub-agent for each MCP you want to use and add instructions in Claude MD to use that sub-agent for a particular topic or task. So let me just give you an example. Go to Claude MD. It says here, Notion task. When the user needs to work with Notion, basically use the Notion specialist agent. Now I go to the Notion specialist agent and it says, you're the Notion specialist and you have access to MCP servers through the agent MCP gateway. Okay. And then it gives it little instructions on how to do that. But basically, um, I have this other file here, which has my actual MCP definitions. Now I've taken out the actual um, secret codes here for the environment variables, but basically I have a different configuration for each MCP, and then I also have rules. So like when the Notion specialist requests from the server to use the Notion MCP, it says, "Oh, I am only going to allow the Notion specialist to do that." And the Notion specialist says, "Well, it's okay. I'm the Notion specialist." So that's basically how this works. And you can go on that README for more information. It's it's right here, Rod Dutra, yeah. And that's pretty much it. And then the result is, yeah, these none. I have a bunch of MCP servers, and they don't take any of the context on the main context. So, and then what is a plugin? Plugins can contain basically all of these things: MCPs, agents, commands, and skills. You can go to Claude Code Marketplace for a bunch of them, and personally, I don't really use them because I use this custom MCP system, and I like more control over things. So, yeah. One other thing I want to talk about is RAG. It's retrieval augmented generation, and basically, it lets you query a knowledge base without loading the whole thing into context. Um, yeah, it's not a Claude native feature, but it is something you can implement using an MCP. So basically, just imagine you have a bunch of documentation somewhere, and you want to be able to like, hey AI, like, um, answer me this question about all this. Like, what are the meeting notes from X, or what does this book say about Y? Right. So um, you can't load the whole book into your context. So you have to use a special system which kind of pre-indexes the book and kind of gives you an LLM which can answer questions about it efficiently. So basically, here's the workflow. So um, well, let's just say we're using Llama Index, which is just one platform, but it's free and easy. So you make a script which processes all your docs using Llama Index, and you save that into a vector DB onto disk. And then yeah, you can make the script a little smarter by not doing redundant processing of things that are already in there. And then you can make an MCP server, for example, using the Python SDK. And by the way, the AIs will basically be able to write all this code for you. And then you add the MCP to Claude, or obviously using the MCP gateway, you can add it there as well. And then the optional thing would be to make an index in your knowledge base. So here's my index, and my knowledge base isn't real. I only have a book about esoteric memes in here. And but basically, this index file says all the information that's in my knowledge base. So in Claude MD, I basically say, look here, when um, when the user requests some information that you don't know the answer to, check to see if it might be in the knowledge base, and checks that index file. If it seems like a good match, then ask the knowledge base specialist to actually query the RAG. Um, and so for example, my knowledge base says, okay, this index says this file contains a door code. So if I ask Claude, you know, hey, what's the door code? Um, it, hopefully, yeah, it's going to know that, hey, I can find that in the knowledge base. So I'm going to search in there and let's see if this actually works. But all right. Well, anyway, I think my something about my thing is currently broken, but it should ultimately tell me that the yeah the code is 999. So that worked. Okay, what next? So yeah, here's just a recap. So you use like Claude MD for kind of global instructions, and you use skills and slash commands for um, when you want to lazy load some context, or just you want to group up some functionality that you're going to call over and over again. You can kind of use either one. I'd say commands are better for shorter things, and skills are better for longer things. I don't know. And then for MCPs, you really should use a gateway and subagents to avoid context bloat. And then obviously, like I said, just use RAG if you want to incorporate custom documentation. Here's just a little bit of bonus fun to wrap this all up. Um, so let me just make sure I'm actually recording. So fucking thing. What was I doing? OBS. Yeah, it's okay. So so what I can do is let's just like I can trigger a keyboard shortcut and it'll open and close Claude no matter what I'm doing. So how do you do that? You go to iTerm2, and I'm assuming you're using Mac. And you go to settings, and then you go to profiles, and then you have a default one right here. But I'm actually going to make a new profile, and that's where it's called Claude on hotkey right here. And then you add your text at the start. So I'm using Claude dangerously skip permissions because I'm a madman, um, and I live dangerously. So um, basically, whenever this profile starts, it'll start with Claude in this mode. And then you want to go over to Window. Sorry, you want to go to Keys and then Hotkey Window. A hotkey opens a dedicated window with this profile. Configure hotkey window. And you set the hotkey right here. And then Bob's your uncle, right? So you just do Command period, and it just does that. So that's pretty cool. And then you honestly can do this in addition to um, other terminals, right? So like even if I close this one, yeah, it's sort of weird. It's a little bit of like an invisible app window. Anyway, I'm gonna leave it there, but hopefully that was helpful. Yeah.